Well, first of all, good afternoon for everyone. For those who maybe do not know me, my name is Said Peñaranda. I'm currently working at Democracy International as an intern. You may be probably familiarized with my colleague Kim Grace, who was co-hosting these webinar sessions during the past weeks. However, I will take over from now on. And I truly hope that this is an enriching meeting for all of you in order to get to know the proposal that we will be discussing today, which is the UN Civil Society Envoy. Before starting, just some quick recommendations. First of all, we kindly ask you to respect each other when it comes to participating, not just like when it comes to speaking, but also on the chat. We also kindly ask you to mute yourself when you're not talking, to raise your hand when you want to intervene. There's a Zoom function for this, that you can just use it when you want to have the word. And finally, do not forget, as I just mentioned, that the webinar will be recorded and published at a later stage on our social media. So if you want to remain anonymous, switch off the camera and change your name on the screen. So that being said, let us introduce Democracy International. We are a non-governmental association or an NGO based in Cologne, Germany, with a sole objective, which naturally spans many causes and projects. And such a foremost goal is to work towards direct democracy, transparency, and human rights related topics, not just within Germany, but throughout the whole world. In order to comply with these purposes, we're naturally constantly relying on our partners at the worldwide level, just as we are working right now jointly with our colleagues from Democracy Without Borders and Civicus for these sessions. Now, let me bring to the fore the specific topic that gathers us together today, which is the one I already outlined, the United Nations Civil Society Envoy. This proposal comes to being within the context of a campaign we are supporting called We the Peoples. And basically, We the Peoples as a project strives to make global governance a more inclusive and plural arena, in which you and I, as normal citizens, can have a say at the transnational level. This is important as humanity, as you already know, is encountering a lot of scourges and challenges that demand international collaboration and cooperation. So because of this, the main organization that we're aiming at in order to exert or impulse a structural change is the United Nations. And we believe there is a need to restructure the UN and make it a more accessible forum for citizens. In this fashion, we have held so far 2 online workshops in which we have featured some of those concrete ideas contained in the We the Peoples campaign that will allow us, will allow us to make the UN a proper scenario for genuine democratic governance to be deployed or to arise. In the first webinar that we offered, we presented the idea of the UNWCI, or United Nations World's Citizens Initiative, which enables people to put forward proposals on key issues at the highest political level. Then 14 days ago, we just presented, we featured our second idea, which was the United Nations Parliamentary Assembly, which allows for the inclusion of elected representatives in the agenda setting and decision-making processes of the UN. And today, we will be presenting the idea on a United Nations Civil Society Envoy, which would enable greater participation, support inclusive convenience, and drive the UN's outreach to the public and the civil society organizations. Because of this, I'm happy to announce that 2 experts on this topic have joined us to discuss the United Nations Civil Society Envoy. On the one hand, we have with us Lisa John, who is the Secretary General at Civicus. On the other hand, we have Mandeep Tiwana, who is also part of Civicus, as a Chief Programs Officer. Lisa, Mandeep, thank you for being with us. And finally, as you already know, in order for you to get more familiarized with this topic of the United Nations Civil Society Envoy, we send you 3 challenges ahead during 1 week in which you were asked to give a response about some questions particular. Your inputs were really good, and therefore we will present them in a while. In fact, we will run a poll to know who took part in these challenges and who did not. But if you, in case you could not take part in them, it's completely okay. Your presence here is more than enough. So after this introduction, we can finally get started. And for this, my colleague Caroline Feaneilen, who is responsible for Democracy International's public relations and global community building, will take over.
Thank you very much, Said, and I'm very happy to see so many of you again here this evening to talk about this really interesting topic. Yes, as Said mentioned, and as you probably know from the previous sessions of these webinars and from our mailings, is even though that we can't meet in person, we try to make this as interactive as possible. And so you should have all received 3 challenges ahead of time. And so first off, we'd like to know if many of you participated. So for that, we're going to launch a poll. You should get a pop-up now where you get a very simple question. The easiest question is whether or not you participated in the challenges. And so we'll just let that run for a little bit. After that, I'm going to summarize a little bit the challenges that we sent out and the responses that we got from you. And luckily, we also have a real specialist on today's topic of a UN Civil Society Envoy, Mandeep Tiwana, who's Chief Programs Officer at Civicus, will afterwards give us a really in-depth but short introduction and background into the campaign around the UN Civil Society expert. And I think what most people having answered, we can answer that, close that poll and share the results. And so it's about even, about half of you participated and half of you didn't, which is totally fine. That's why I am recapping it. So now with this poll over, I'm going to try and share my screen. I hope that works. Just a minute. Can everybody see that?
Yes, we can see it. Pardon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. So we had 3 questions for you. The first challenge related to the role of civil society in our existing system of global governance, and there it really can be argued increasing importance. So we invited you to think about the role of civil society organizations, that what they play in the international system, what they can achieve, and how their influence can be seen. And so here are some of the responses that you sent into that question. So that civil society acts as a bridge between citizens and governments, because they are, of course, basically citizen lobbies that organize themselves to bring issues to the attention of the UN and member states, that they have a role to move member states in a certain direction, that they are independent voices, that they offer a different perspective, that they can challenge conventional wisdom, somebody wrote in there. We're also facing complexer challenges that are increasingly outside of the power of member states. So that's also an important reason for the increased role of civil society. Citizens themselves are getting better educated and better organized. So that also means that there are maybe more civil society organizations. They play an important role to monitor corporations. I think that's also an important point that one of you raised. And somebody also raised a very interesting question that maybe we can touch upon in the discussion, is also how can we better support civil society? Are there financial mechanisms that exist to support small CSOs that need it? Second challenge that we asked you to look at were some of the difficulties that civil society organizations encounter in gaining access to global governance, and then, of course, specifically the UN system, which is the focus of our talk today. And so people mentioned that there is no official pathway, that there's a lack of oversight or accountability. There's no structures to accommodate civil society organizations. Member states are mostly driven by member state party politics, and so there's not enough citizen control. There's not enough room for opposition or deviant opinions, as it was written in here. There's also maybe a lack of means and competences within civil society organizations that constitutes a problem. It is hard for CSOs to get attention, maybe also media attention. The UN itself doesn't really have a bottom-up mechanism that CSOs can access. And somebody wrote also that even if civil society organizations' voices are heard, there aren't really outcomes to follow up their participation. So that is also an important point that we will hopefully discuss some more about. And then the third challenge that we sent to you, we asked you to think a little bit about why a civil society envoy could be a way to alleviate some of these issues and what this role could look like. And so a lot of people pointed out climate change as an important topic. I think the reasoning behind that is that it's a topic that sort of goes above member state level, so that needs international cooperation, which is something that CSOs can maybe bring to the table. Somebody also mentioned that this UN Civil Society Envoy that this office should maybe have manageable areas of work that are specialized in some of these topics. Somebody wrote that there should be attention for the North-South gap, that there should be tools put in place to help CSOs that traditionally have lesser access. And that the UN Civil Society Envoy could really centralize the access of civil society organizations to the UN system. He or she or they should be the main access point. And so I think that sort of sums up what you have, the thoughts you had reading through the materials we sent you. And now, luckily, we also have an expert who will tell us a little bit more about the campaign and the background of the idea. Yes, Said, back to you.
Yes, so as Caroline said, now our expert Mandeep, he is going to introduce us to this topic in a more in-depth and elaborated way. So Mandeep, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Syed, and thank you, Caroline. It's a pleasure to be here. When you talked about expert, it reminded me of an old joke. Some of my colleagues in India used to say, expert is someone who knows more and more about less and less. So I hope I'm not an expert in that category, but consider myself more a civil society generalist. And as you know, Civicus, the organization I work for, seeks to promote civil society participation in decision-making and defend the rights that go along with it. The idea of a civil society envoy is something that we have been, pushing for quite some time, along with several other organizations and coalitions, including Together First, Coalition for the UN We Need, and of course the We the People's campaign, which has been spearheading this. So just on it's great to hear all the responses that have come through, and I think they resonate very closely with some of our work. And Caroline, you'd asked me to just share some reflections on the three questions that had been asked. So on the first question, what is the role of civil society actors in the global system and why do they become important? If we look at the opening words of the UN Charter, they begin with the words, we the peoples. But we know that a lot of the business of the UN is carried out by bureaucrats. It's carried out by officials who are sometimes removed from people. So civil society, in a sense, plays that role, that bridging role of getting people's concerns, getting people's aspirations, and representing people's needs within the work of the UN. So that's an absolutely critical role that civil society does. In fact, civil society organizations and civil society representatives help ensure more inclusive decision-making, more inclusive policy-making in the work of the UN, and particularly in relation to those who are excluded, those whose views, whose aspirations are sometimes not counted within the political priorities of the government of the day. Civil society organizations also help with innovative problem solving to complex development solutions. In many instances around the world, where state apparatuses fail, civil society organizations provide important service delivery and essential services to people who are at risk or whose services, to whom services are not fully delivered. And most importantly, civil society organizations help ensure transparency, accountability, and participation in decision-making. So over the years, civil society has helped make some very important changes and innovations and helped bring about progress in the work of the UN. Importantly, this is through norm setting on human rights issues, norm setting on gender justice, norm setting on important matters such as freedom of peaceful assembly, where some progress has been made at the UN Human Rights Committee, which is the expert body of jurists that interprets the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights just last year. But civil society has also helped in making important progress on issues which are important to humanity, such as proliferation of nuclear weapons, banning of landmines, and of course in peace negotiations and in conflict resolution and so on. So I just wanted to come to the current question: what are the current problems with partnerships between the UN and CSOs? Now, a lot of progress has been made, and I think it's undeniable that over the years that civil society has been able to increase its access at the UN, and the UN also sees civil society as an important partner. But a lot of the relationships, a lot of the partnerships that the UN and civil society have are oftentimes asymmetrical. There are sometimes inconsistencies in how UN departments engage with civil society. Some UN departments and offices and agencies do an excellent job of engaging with civil society. They treat civil society as critical partners, whereas some other agencies and departments have different modalities of engaging with civil society, which are not so open, which are not so transparent, and which are not in such a cooperative way. In fact, even the understanding of civil society partnerships under the Sustainable Development Goals leaves a little bit of scope. So if you look at Goal 1717 of Agenda 2030, which says, which talks about effective and meaningful partnerships, you find that the indicator for that is number of dollars committed to partnerships. Now, we have to ensure that apart from just the funding for partnerships, we need to have enabling environments for partnerships to take place. So I think the biggest problem is the inconsistency and some of the asymmetries in partnerships that happen across the UN. And I think greater work needs to be done on that, which brings us to the issue of the civil society envoy. Now, the idea of having a civil society envoy in a way is important to help shine a spotlight on some of these inconsistencies that happen within civil society partnerships. The idea of the envoy is to be an enabling position, an enabling office that helps open up the doors of the UN to civil society, and most importantly, to people's concerns and concerns of people who are oftentimes excluded. So just on that point, we hope that that this civil society envoy's office can help clear up some of the bottlenecks that exist, some of the historical and cultural issues that may exist within the UN's functioning, where civil society access may be limited or restricted. So, and to ensure that the good practices that exist within the UN are percolated and are adopted across the whole organization. And that's important too, and also to shine a spotlight on some of the chronic problems of partnership with civil society and inclusion of people. The other important aspect of this civil society envoy position really is to drive the outreach to people. The UN can oftentimes seem very distant to people on the ground. A lot of UN offices are located in important places, in places like New York or in Rome or in Geneva, which could be far removed from people on the ground whom the UN seeks to serve. So the civil society envoy position will also drive outreach to people. And I'm happy to discuss further on this, but we really believe this is going to be an important innovation in the UN's work, particularly when the UN is celebrating 75 years of its existence, and a commitment has been made in the declaration to commemorate 75 years of the UN to upgrade the UN. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mandeep, for those amazing insights. I think now we have more content to nurture the debate. And in this order of ideas, I would like to ask maybe if there's someone in the public that has a specific question for Mandeep about this topic, about this initiative, so that we can discuss it. In addition, I can see that we have some comments already on the chat. For instance, Daniel Schaubacher says that establishing the function of a civil society envoy or envoys at the UN could be achieved through a UN reform conference as per Article 109C of the UN Charter, which he also states is now overdue since it should have been organized by 1955 according to the UN Charter. We also have Rick Orser stating that it sounds like a UNPA might be easier to start. That's a really interesting comment. Rick, if you can maybe elaborate a little bit more, that would be amazing. And yes, I also can see that Ina is raising her hand. So Ina, the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm sorry it took me a little longer. First of all, it's an incredible opportunity to be a part of this campaign and to be able to discuss these things. And really, I'm inside my own conference right now. We brought together a crowd of 50 people, and it's a hybrid event, which is an incredible in these days. And we are discussing these issues including and the campaign including. And I have to quickly say about what we do, and we call it civic education. We have 30 years experience of this. So I just wanted to chime in the importance of what I think is not really on the table. So I think that this initiative should also include the civic education, because we not only have to give voices to those unrepresented, it's also about a greater and broader concept of civics. And this is something that should be discussed widely and globally, because I really believe that civics these days become something than just more than to be a good citizen of your own country, or more than to be a good neighbor to your neighbor. This is about our responsibility on a global level. My responsibility and my willing to help whatever disaster is happening on this planet. And I think it should be a shared feeling. And it's good when kids are brought up with this idea, but we cannot look out for all the families. It's great if it's a part of a general education, but I don't think some things cannot be taught. It's really something that people can come together with through discussions and some shared good practices. And I think the civic education, as we understand it, should definitely be on the table and a part of the campaign. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Ina. Those are also incredible insights. I don't know, Mandeep, if maybe you want to comment on them. In addition, if there is someone else that has any question, please, you can proceed.
So thank you for the question on civic education. Yes, certainly, I think civic education is a very important part of the UN's work. But civic education is also being carried out through various UN agencies and offices, in a sense, through the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, through UN Women, and of course, the part of the people's participation and civil society engagement is also done through the Human Rights Council and the working bits of the Universal Periodic Review. So civic education certainly is something that should permeate across all UN agencies, departments, and offices, and this office can certainly help promote that in a sense. But civic education, particularly around norms in relation to participation and civil society engagement, perhaps might help focus this position a little more. I'm also mindful of the question about from Daniel about the civil society envoy and an amendment in the charter. Well, I don't claim to be an expert on the UN Charter, but I don't think we probably need an amendment in the UN Charter for the creation of this position. In fact, many of the people who are part of the coalition that is pushing for the civil society envoy say that it should be a relatively easy process within the UN. Basically we should elevate this position by having it, at a high level, so an Undersecretary General could be appointed within the UN, and perhaps this is something that the Executive Office of the Secretary General and others can take forward, and perhaps even create a dedicated funding from a group of governments that support civil society and and of course believe in the value of civil society participation. So I would say that it may not require a lot of amendments or changes within the UN's working modalities.
Thank you, Mandeep. So before jumping to our next session, the next section of our webinar, there's another question or another hand that is raised. Darak, you can go ahead.
Thanks. I'll just lower my hand here. Just on the issue of the appointment of this office of the envoy. You mentioned there, Mandeep, about the Secretary General potentially electing a senior official or designating them. Do you think there'd be any way of having civil society actors themselves somehow select a representative or an appointee? And can you envision ways that they could be recallable or held to account if they didn't fulfill their mandate?
Thank you. I think that's a really good question, and of course, adequate civil society consultation in senior UN positions remains an issue that we remain concerned about. So I would say that perhaps a consultative process could be done, with a representative group of civil society organizations on, firstly, what kind of person do we really want for the civil society envoy? And perhaps once some clear criteria is drawn up, a transparent process that invites applications should be put in place, just as it's done for UN special experts. A lot of special rapporteurs are selected through a open call. So I would say it might help set a good precedent in this instance to have to have a position like that, and obviously someone who knows civil society, who's willing to engage, somebody who's willing to also be courageous in ensuring that some of the bottlenecks that are there within the UN system are opened up. And I just wanted to highlight that the UN Secretary General is supposed to present a report on our common agenda in September, and we're really hoping that the civil society envoy position would be included within that report, and it would fulfill a long-standing aspiration of many of us in civil society.
Perfect, Mandeep. Thank you so much for that. Also, thank you, Darak, for your questions, and thank you everyone for your questions. So now we can jump to the next section. And for that, basically, Lisa is going to tell us, or she's going to give us some arguments in regards to, or regarding, why should we support this initiative and what are the pros of it. After doing that, I will also try to pose a counter argument, or more than a counter argument, I will try to pose maybe not that bright side of the initiative, and let's see what do you all think, and also it would be really relevant to know the opinions of our experts. So Lisa, the floor is yours. You can go ahead.
Thank you, Syed. And just to say that I'm calling in from Johannesburg. My network isn't great today, so if you can't hear me at any point, you'll have to wave your hands so that I can shut my video off. But having said that, I think Mandeep laid out such a comprehensive baseline, right, of why the People's Campaign is calling for the civil society envoy. So what I'm going to do is maybe lean closer to your devil's advocate role and just pick up some of the challenges or some of the trends that we need to respond to in advocating for this proposition. So first, it's an idea that's long overdue. I mean, I know that when we negotiate with the UN and when we call for reforms, the ambition and the spirit of the reform gets very easily converted into a lot of technical and legalese, which is then kind of really takes the debate and the push for that reform away from grassroots organizations and groups and makes it again a New York centered or a Geneva centered conversation. And I think we really have to make sure that this continues to represent the larger idea of a citizen-centered or a people-centered or a people-powered UN, and it doesn't again become something that gets locked into all kinds of ritualistic and procedural debates about the concept of the civil society and envoy itself. And therefore, I'm reminded actually of a few processes that have happened in the last 15 years, including the Millennium Campaign or the outreach that happened before the Sustainable Development Goals were actually framed. And there was a very wide, kind of ranging, there was an effort and an investment put into ensuring that a very large cross-section of civil society was able to engage, and a lot of new ideas were able to be brought into the UN space and the policy making, kind of debates essentially. So I think we need to hold on to that. And that's why for me, I feel like it's impossible to talk about the UN Civil Society Envoy without also talking about the World Citizen Initiative. And these two really should go hand in hand. So we shouldn't settle for the position of a CSE being created, which would be relatively easy in terms of structure for the UN to do, and then have to wait another 10 years for the citizen initiative to come into fore, right? I mean, these are two things that have to work together, because the ultimate objective of the envoy is to ensure greater diversity of citizen and civil society voices are represented and heard within the UN system, and there's greater accountability to people-powered movements and social movements on the ground through the work of the UN. And this actually also one of the biggest challenges we're seeing in terms of trends in civil society and our state of civil society reports really is the fact that there is a systematic effort to dismantle democratic processes across the world, and the rise of the kind of narrow nationalism which prevents groups that are most excluded and most affected by those kind of vested politics to find any space to air their issues and their needs and priorities. And we're seeing that playing out right now in the context of Afghanistan, and the fact that civil society in Afghanistan is just not able to get the support, the international support they need, or the mechanisms they need to hold the parties to account. So I think we need to have a balance between people who understand the technicalities of the UN and are able to push through the low-hanging fruit or the gains that we need, but also the people on the outside who continuously bring the radical side of the people-centered or people-powered changes we want through this campaign to stick and to be top of mind when we negotiate and for more tangible outcomes. So I'm just going to stop there. There are many other issues we need to raise, including how we engage or how we hold the UN accountable in its engagement with the private sector. For instance, the fact that a lot of non-state actors are actually more of a threat to civil society than governments are in many contexts, and therefore the increasing need for civil society to be better resourced, better represented, and much more strongly empowered to be in not just a consultative, but a decision-making role within all levels of the UN, including the Security Council, actually. So I'll stop there.
Perfect, Lisa. Those are really good inputs. And well, as promised, now I will start with this devil's advocate section. As I said, I will just I will come with some statements. And the idea is that, to see what's your reaction on them, or maybe if you have some counter arguments to rebuke them. So I will get started. It's not a secret that there's a huge gap between global North and global South countries when it comes to empowering citizens and civil society organizations. It's not the same. The actions, for example, of a civil society organization in Germany won't have the same scope as the actions that an organization from Colombia, for instance, would have or may have. So taking into account this context, how can we prevent global North countries and hence global North-based civil society organizations from co-opting the initiative, or well, this proposal of the UN Civil Society Envoy? How can we prevent them to have this sort of exclusivity or prominence when it comes to setting up the agenda?
So are you expecting me to respond? Or
I mean, if you want to go ahead, it's okay, but
Okay.
anyone can react on this statement. So yeah, everyone is free to
maybe just the 2 points which are in the chat about financing and the political support. I think those two are going to be critical, right, in terms of ensuring the accountability and the broader kind of ambition and mandate. And it would be great to hear from the people who wrote them what they had in mind as well.
Yes, for sure. Let me check here a moment. Okay, let's see if maybe they elaborate a little bit more about it. But again, if someone else wants to react on this statement, you are free to do it. In fact, I will also like to share another statement, and it's basically that we all know that one of our main complaints regarding the UN is the bureaucracy behind it. So, I mean, because it naturally deprives civil organizations from taking part in the discussion. So the thing is, if we formalize these, or if we formalize the participation of these organizations at the UN level, wouldn't these initiatives coming from the civil society be constrained or even ignored due to all of this bureaucracy at some point? How can we maybe prevent that from happening? That's another statement I would like to put on the table, and if someone wants to comment on it, you can go ahead. Or if you have any other questions as well, you can, or any other comments, you can go as well.
I would also like to invite, because people are writing things in the chat, and it's just, the idea is that we have a lively discussion here. So please just go ahead and bring it into the actual live discussion. I see somebody wrote sortition. I think that's an interesting idea. The financing topic is definitely really interesting as well. So the people who wrote that.
Yes, Justin, you can go ahead.
Yeah, hi. So I guess I was typing up a long chat thing, so thanks for cutting me off. It is probably better to do it this way. But I just wanted to echo Liza's point about I just have this fear is if we get this one reform through, which I do think compared to some of the other global governance innovations that we're looking at, is probably like the low-hanging fruit in terms of the spectrum of substantive structural changes, that if we get this one thing through, they might just, the powers that are invested in maintaining the status quo might just say, okay, well, we gave you that, we'll see you in 25 years at the next big event, and we can talk about reform then. So I think that, I know we don't want to put everything all together, and that, maybe then it becomes too hard to pass these reforms, but certainly if we just do this one on its own, I'm a little worried that we might not be able to, push other things like the UNPA or, the Citizens Initiative and these other areas.
Thank you so much for that, Justin. Yes.
I would have a comment on that actually, because I mean, it's no secret we're organizing these webinars. And so at Democracy International, we work together with Civicus and Democracy Without Borders on exactly these three proposals, right? The World Citizens Initiative and the Parliamentary Assembly and the Civil Society Envoy. And so I think the magic of this low-hanging fruit proposal, as you call it, is that that this person who will become the civil society envoy and this office, they can also push for reform within the UN system. So it doesn't end there. We of course hope that this is also going to be sort of a gateway to more reforms, and that this person will really become a champion for civil society concerns. And as Lisa said, and I think that was an excellent point, the World Citizens Initiative, it is sort of a natural ally there, because it's really the way that you can source all of these diverse opinions, and would be a very useful tool for a civil society envoy. So we sort of see them as linked.
I could maybe just jump in there. I'd mentioned the sortition in the chat, just as a suggestion to Saeed's question How can you avoid, richer countries co-opting this? And like maybe in conjunction with the World Citizens Initiative, like the envoy could eventually, employ that tactic of sortition, whereby different countries would or civil society groups would put forth members who then could be basically lotteried off, I guess, and that may be just a suggestion of one way of like avoiding, potentially avoiding it being co-opted by richer states, if just by sheer chance of a lottery system.
Yes, thank you, Drag. That sounds also like a really good or potential solution for this problem, because I personally think that this is one of the main scourges we must face at the multilateral or at the transnational level when it comes to empowering organizations or individuals, that we always have like these groups that have a de facto power taking over, and in the end, the people that need to be heard, or those that need to be heard, are not heard. And it's definitely not the output that we desire. So yes, I don't know if maybe there are any other comments, reactions. Feel free to raise your hand and share that with us. Maybe, I don't know if Rick, as you were mentioning this founding related topic in the chat, maybe you can, just if you want and can, maybe you can elaborate a little bit more about it, because Lisa was interested on this particular comment. That would be amazing. Or maybe if you just want to elaborate a little bit more on the chat, that also would be great. Yeah. So, well,
I'm here.
Yes, Justin, you can go ahead.
I'm here.
All right. I just had another question, and I'm not sure which of the experts could address this, but like I don't know a lot about how these types of things would like I'd love to hear, like, explain it like I'm 5, like make it really simple. How precisely would we do this? Like, who would initiate this reform, and how many? I don't know, like exactly how does it go from this chat to like it's in existence? I'd love to know more.
That's a really good question, Justin. And in fact, I think it's important, because in the end, we also need to communicate. I mean, maybe here we have people that they are somehow related to politics and they understand these technical terms and so on, but it is important, as you mentioned, also to communicate, like, to people in general, what is this about and how to make it happen. So in this order of ideas, it would be great if Lisa and Mandeep can maybe address this question.
Mandeep, you can go first.
Sure. One is, a lot of work has already been done. So, there used to be an Assistant Secretary General for External Relations before. There have been UN reports, including the Cardozo Commission, where, the need for a civil society, and envoy in different ways, not exact, in precise ways, has been acknowledged. Some democratic governments have already, taken forward this initiative. They support this initiative. So what really needs to be done at this point is for governments that support civil society to speak up publicly. So, those of us who are on this call can, speak to representatives of our governments, or governments that, they are engaged with, to express their support, and let those governments let the UN know that, they support the call for a civil society envoy. Already there's also a lot of movement within civil society that's happening. The pressure has been built up. Now we really need to petition the Secretary General's office to include this position in the Common Agenda report. And then a group of governments can come together and say, look, you don't need to have a set budgetary allocation of the UN budget. A few governments can put forward a pooled fund for this office, which should not be very expensive to have in place. So that's what's really needed. So I would just say groundwork has been done, but we need to socialize this idea much more, and also blunt some of the arguments that are being made against this position that, one of the arguments that is being made is that this position would be then, you know, all the civil society related issues would be funneled into this position. That's not actually what we are saying. We are saying this position actually would open up the doors of the UN to civil society. So those are the sorts of arguments that need to be made a little more, but there needs to be much more public support from you know, people who may be considered as experts, maybe people who are considered to be, you know, to be in you know, having experience of diplomacies at the UN, and also government representatives, you know, should come forward, but also, you know, also publics need to be able to support and say that the UN needs to do a better job of outreach to civil society, and a civil society envoy can support this.
Thank you, Mandeep. So I can see that Daniel is also raising his hand. Before going with you, Daniel, I would like to jump firstly to Lisa so that we can have a sort of continuity in terms of the question. So Lisa, maybe do you have some last outputs?
Sure. Just to say that if you just look at some of the structural reforms that have happened that are civil society facing and oriented, the creation of UN Women, the youth envoy position that came into effect, you know, it's really important that the civil society envoy doesn't become like a clearinghouse for existing civil society participation. It has to be kind of the leader and the visionary in how civil society, groups or movements that have been unreached, that are, you know, deliberately kept away from the UN system because their political agenda doesn't, you know, contradicts what governments want, or at their own, within their own borders. Those groups are the ones who are also present and are setting the agenda and the decision-making kind of processes of the UN. And I think, therefore, it really needs to be some kind of avenger, you know, the civil society avenger kind of personality, and not another diplomat or bureaucrat who's just going to toe the line and be like a safe player within the UN system.
Thank you for that, Lisa. So now we can go ahead with Daniel's comments. Daniel, you are free to go ahead now.
Well, thank you for organizing these webinars and for what you do for humankind. This is very important. I think the problem is system change. You know, the world is still so-called governed by the Westphalians. In 1648, you see, the princes, the kings, the emperors decided not to meddle in the affairs of each other and try to solve conflicts and issues which were beyond their borders through treaties, through somehow discussions and arbitration. And the UN system functions this way. Now we need to go to a post-Westphalian system. This needs, of course, education. We all are spiritual beings, I think, who are members of humanity. So we have to go away from the Westphalian way of thinking to system change, and think that the global problems will eventually be solved, you see, when we recognize our belonging to humankind, that we are world citizens. So I think, for example, the gender issue is very important, because we were all born, you see, through the act of love somehow. And the mothers educate their children already, you see, when it is in their womb. They transmit them also spiritual values, you see, this love for humanity or for the earth, for our environment, and so on. And this goes on, and they educate also their children. They play a very important role in society. So all these global problems, you see, must be tackled through a change in the way we think about our present times. I think this is very important, and education to world citizenship is very important, but in a federal way. You see, I'm of Swiss origin, so Switzerland is organized bottom up. Another problem is that in the world, we try to be organized top down. This is not the way to do it, you see. We know this very well, you see. So democracy is exerted locally for local issues, regionally, nationally. I think the EU, when it takes a community approach, can create a sense of belonging to the European values, but also to the world citizenship values. It can be a model, because I live here in Belgium, in Europe. So that's what I wanted to say. We need to quit the Westphalian way of thinking and go to the realities of humankind of today.
Thank you so much for those comments, Daniel. It's really inspiring. And I think it's you brought to the fore a really good analogy. I think that Caroline also wanted to mention something.
I just I wanted to say that really circles back to this idea we also had at the beginning about civic education and about making people aware that they're not just citizens of their nation states, but also citizens of the world. And I think what makes this idea of a civil society envoy so powerful is that civil society organizations are the ones who have been playing this role already very successfully for a long time. If climate change is now an international topic that everybody pays attention to, it's because civil society put it on the agenda. And so I think that the idea of the civil society envoy, the strength in it is that it can help magnify these voices. And I thought that's I thought that was a really interesting point. And I think that's just something to keep in mind.
Thank you, Caroline. So, well, we are almost done with this session, but we still have two more hands that are raised. So Rick, if you can also share your insights with us, you can go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Zed. Just wanted to say that, I appreciate what civil society is doing. I'm involved myself with civil society, including through the Sustainable Development Goals, but it's just not enough. We've got to face up to the fact that civil society is just not working in terms of getting change done at the UN. We need something more than that. We need a more powerful voice there, a more powerful ally there at the UN. And the UNPA is our way to do that. Having parliamentarians as allies is the only way that's going to change the UN as far as I'm concerned. They've got the magic power. They're the superheroes in a way, in terms of their ability to change things in order to form governments. They're the ones that form governments. They're the ones we elect to form governments. So civil society has to recognize this and fully support democracy, which is the foundation of human rights, and the people who we elect through democracy, who are parliamentarians. And that route is through the UNPA. We need a UNPA at the UN so we can do this. Simple as that. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. I definitely think we must be realistic, and also, exerting a sort of criticism over our actions. It's really important so that we can achieve those goals that we want as a civil society. Also, well, we can go with the last intervention. Christoph, the floor is yours.
Yes, good evening, all of you. I was listening to Daniel Schaubacher's comment, and I absolutely agree with his thinking of the system. As I come from the same country as he, I also appreciate democracy, but I think just changing to democracy is not the system that I would like to have the system change. We have some advantages here, but still, if you look deeply into the policy of our country, we are not able to change the system. And I was just asking myself, how can we change the system?
Yes, I think definitely, Christoph, that's one of the main challenges that we have, trying to disentangle that I mean, apparently simple, but it's a really complex question. So yes, definitely, I think that it is something we will keep in mind after the session is over. That being said, we are almost done with this session. I don't know if there's any last intervention. Yeah, I think Caroline, you can go ahead.
No, I was just wondering if maybe we could have some closing arguments from our colleagues at Civicus.
For sure. Lisa, yes, yeah, I can see that you're raising your hand. So you can go ahead.
Yeah, just to say that I completely weigh in on the idea of having broader allies and alliances that help create the systems change. I would disagree that civil society hasn't made a difference, because of all the sectors that we have on the planet, it's the one sector with the minimum resources and capacities and the most restrictions that still continues to deliver time and again. Within the UN, I think there's again a deliberate effort to actually restrict our voice and our participation and our presence. And it's being done because we are so effective and because governments don't want the kind of change that we're calling for. So I think it's really important for us to own our agency and our impatience and our power and bring that wherever we have, spaces to engage with it. But also in terms of understanding systemic change, really know that there are huge forces that we're working against. So the Civicus Monitor, which Mandeep is close to, where we track civic freedoms across the world, we know that 9 out of 10 people on the planet now live in contexts where we can't exercise our civic freedoms, where civil society is not allowed to operate, and still we're pushing for the best outcome, right? In so many complex situations. So I would just say that it's easy to feel disheartened and to feel like we don't have the power to make a change, but every single major systemic change in the last 10 years that has happened in the world has been because of the force of organizing and influencing and global solidarity, and that's something we should continue to defend and stand for and speak about no matter where we are.
Thank you for those words, Lisa. Also, Mandeep, if maybe you have some last words to wrap up, you're more than welcome.
I just say that the call for a civil society envoy is complementary to the World Citizens Initiative, as Lisa said, and to the Parliamentary Assembly. I think all of these reforms need to go together, and anyway, any process of reform needs a multiplicity of actors. So of course, committed public servants and civil society working together. Of course, we need people who are in power. Decision makers. They all need to come together. In a people-centered approach. So that's really what's going to help us get this change. But we certainly need this, and we certainly need more visionary leadership, more openness from the United Nations to make the UN fit for purpose in the 21st century. The UN is, of course, a very different institution, or the world has changed very much since the UN started. And I think we need to keep an eye on the future, and all of these ideas can help us get to a future where the UN matters more to people's lives and is more responsive and inclusive. Thank you.
Amazing, Mandeep. Thank you so much for those words. So, well, it is already 6 p.m. We are already over with this session for today. We want to thank all of the attendees for your time and for taking part in this amazing discussion. Mandeep and Lisa, also thank you so much for your time, for your collaboration. We also want to thank the GLS Treuhand organization for the financial support to make this happen. And do not forget that on September the 8th, we will have our very final session. And we also expect to count you in. So that being said, thank you so much for your participation, and we hope you have an amazing rest of the day.
Thank you so much.